Alrighty then. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 176. I am your host, pannobhasa, and I am sitting before you on a Saturday evening at the time of recording this in a state of complete dishabille because it's like 2 days after Christmas. I don't have anywhere to go. Some of you guys don't even look at me because you're just listening to a podcast or something. So why should I beautify myself, which is really against Buddhist ethics anyway? And before I start answering questions, of which there's not a whole lot because people are busy doing Christmassy, holiday, Saturnalia kind of stuff, I would point out that 176 clearly is not a prime number. It is in fact 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 11. And for my beverage, it's very, very, I was going to say watered down coffee, but actually it's milked down coffee. I'm already kind of zinged from caffeine, so I figure I shouldn't be like chugging coffee anymore today. And we really do not have a lot of questions, and so we could be definitely less than an hour and a half today. And I guess I should just wade into this. Very first question is from Jimmy Lad. And Jimmy Lad says, can you speak more about this guy who was a monk for 13 years and became an anti-Buddhist? What made him quit and turn against the Dhamma? Well, I would say he didn't really become an anti-Buddhist. It's kind of a strange situation that he was an extremist. I've mentioned this person before, and he had asked me personally in the past not to go into too much detail with regard to his life. Some stuff he would prefer to be like private, and he's an extremely private person because he is essentially a hermit. He does not like the human race all that much, and he's eccentric, let's say. He was the one who lived in the big hollow banyan tree in Upper Burma for a number of years. And he lived in caves in Thailand after all the foreigners were kicked out of Burma back around 1988, I think. Anyways, he was an extremist. Like most people, like I've said before, this is a relatively recent Q&A. I was mentioning him, not in this context, but you've got the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture. And most people, including most monks, kind of veer towards the self-indulgent side, whereas this person veered the other way. He was veering towards just extreme asceticism. And at one point, he had like a breakdown, which he thought was due to sleep deprivation, just chronic sleep deprivation, because he was trying to follow all of the Dhutangas at the highest level, which includes never lying down. And if you follow the sitters practice, as it is called, at the highest level, then you're not even leaning back against anything. So he was still cheating a little bit because he was leaning forwards. He'd put his bowl on the floor in front of him and just lean his forehead onto his alms bowl and sleep that way. And apparently was insufficient. He had a kind of breakdown. And this is back when Venerable Taungpulu Sayadaw was still alive. Taungpulu Sayadaw was his preceptor. So he got sent back to America. He disrobed, went back to America until he was recovered. As soon as he was well enough to come back, recovered enough from this breakdown that he had, he just comes right back, reordains. And he was very strict. I've told stories, I won't go into details this time, but I have told stories about just his extreme strictness with regard to Vinaya. And he was sort of held up to me as a role model. We were ordained in the same tradition, and he was extremely strict with regard to, Vinaya rules, the rules of monastic discipline, that sort of thing. And so I kind of emulated him to some degree, trying to be some kind of Buddhist Rambo. But I think part of the reason was he was just like an extremist. I think that he probably hadn't fully mastered the middle path. And so after being a monk for like 13 years, he just kind of decided, well, it's just not possible. It's kind of BS or something. But the thing is, it was like an intellectual decision at the surface, but deep down, he still had faith in Dhamma and like Dhamma practice, because to this day, I'm pretty sure he's still in monastic robes in Burma. It's just he is now called a Yavate in Burmese, which is an unordained renunciant, an unordained Buddhist renunciant. So, I mean, he kind of thinks, enlightenment doesn't exist. You just can't do it. The Buddha himself was like some ancient Joseph Goldstein. He floated that idea to me at least once while we were sitting together in his hollow tree. But still, deep down, he had faith in Dhamma. And to this day, as far as I know, if he's still alive, he's more than 10 years older than I am, living in the tropics. So, but he's still essentially just a renunciant meditator. So at some deep level, he still has faith in Dhamma, which is better than a lot of people who drop out of the monkhood and they don't not only stop being monks, they stop being Buddhist. So I guess I'm doing better than a lot of people who drop out of the monkhood. But I mean, some people, they just deliberately ordain for a few years just to get some intensive practice under their belt so that they can drop out and become a teacher at some place like IMS or Spirit Rock or some Vipassana center, that kind of thing. So he eventually did have to move out of the hollow tree because people started starting chicken farms, which just caused like this reek of chicken shit just kind of pervading the atmosphere in that area. So he wound up moving out, and I guess he's like living in like an industrial park on the outskirts of Rangoon, Burma at present. That's the last I heard, which was about a year ago. Just the grandson of one of the main supporters of Taungpulu Sayadaw kind of took him under his wing, so to speak, or just decided to continue supporting him, even though he wasn't a monk anymore. And a lot of Burmese people consider that to be really important. Once you're not ordained anymore, it's like you've lost this superhuman status. Because the Burmese don't even use the word for human being applied to monks. Monks have their own honorific titles and so forth. You don't use the word human towards monks. Sometimes monks or other Burmese people would ask me, what did you do for a living back when you were a human? That kind of thing. So what made him quit was he just tried as hard as he could and did not succeed in becoming enlightened. I think that's the main reason. He didn't really turn against the Dharma except sort of at this superficial intellectual level. Whereas, he was still just practicing for the most part at a higher level than most monks. And to this day, he still has a Pali name like on his passport and everything, because he legally had his name changed to his monk name, and then after he dropped out, he's just stuck with this monk name that he didn't bother to change back to his original lay name. And before moving on, I will point out that he was from Midland, Texas. So he had like this Texas accent, like our teacher Pakoku Sayadaw. He'd call him Pakoku Sayadaw. But I'm just going to move on to the next question. Also from Jimmy Ladd. And Jimmy Ladd says, let's see here. Is this right? Yeah, okay. Jimmy Ladd says, when the Burmese monks believed the Buddha was 27 feet tall, how do they think he fit inside the palace where he grew up, and other practical situations where his extreme size would be absurd? I used to wonder about that too, and I think most people just don't really try to do the math. It's like the religious mindset where you don't want to be finding fault with your own religion. It's like, well, it's got to be true somehow. I don't know how it's true, but I'm not going to question it because I might go to hell for it. That kind of thing. that's common in a place like Burma, a devoutly Buddhist country, a devoutly Buddhist culture like Burma, then, most people just won't even go there. The flat earth too, that kind of stuff. They just, it's got to be true, but I'm not going to really get into how it's true. I'm just going to have faith in what the texts say and just humbly accept that and just continue on with my life. But there is a certain book that I read when I was in Burma called The Great Chronicle of Buddhas, which is an English translation of, it's a kind of commentary on the Buddha Wangsa, which is canonical. At least the verses of the Buddha Wangsa are canonical. They are part of the Tipitaka. And this book was written by Mingun Tipitaka Dharasiyaro, who was one of the most honored, famous Burmese monks of the 20th century. He was the one who recited the Tipitaka, the Pali Tipitaka, which he had memorized by heart at the Burmese Sixth Council in 1956 with, I think it was Mahasi Sayadaw was the questioner. Mingun Tipitaka Dharasiyaro, he had like a photographic memory, had memorized the 40 volumes of the Burmese Tipitaka, plus a number of other texts like Pali grammars and commentaries and this kind of thing. And Mingun Tipitaka Dharasiyaro was, the government had just exhausted all of the ecclesiastical honorific titles to bestow upon this monk. And so they were just having to invent new titles just for him because he just kept outdoing himself with regard to his scholarship and so forth. And so Mingun Tipitaka Dharasiyaro in this book, he knew full well that the Buddha really wasn't a whole heck of a lot taller than everybody else. He was described as tall in the texts, but he wasn't taller than a giraffe compared with other people. There's stories of the Buddha and Mahakassapa exchanging robes. So that the Buddha started wearing Mahakassapa's robe, Mahakassapa started wearing the Buddha's robe. Also, there is a rule of monastic discipline in the Patimokkha with regard to the maximum allowable size for monks' robes. And in the story, the Buddha's half-brother Nanda, Venerable Nanda, who was also a monk, he was, I think, if I remember correctly, he was 3 finger widths shorter than the Buddha. So, he was not a Maha Purisa, he was not a great man. He was not a Sama Buddha, fully enlightened being. He probably did become an Arhat, according to the tradition. But still, he wasn't like this outstanding superhuman being other than just being enlightened. And still, he's this much shorter, so he'd be like 26'9" instead of 27. Also, like in the Samanyapala Sutta, King Ajatasattu goes with Jivaka the doctor to meet the Buddha. And they get to where the Sangha is, and Jivaka the doctor doesn't know, King Ajatasattu doesn't know which one is the Buddha. So Jivaka the doctor says he's the one leaning against the post. He's the one sitting there leaning against a post. He doesn't say, oh, he's that gigantic one who's 27 feet tall. And numerous cases in which the Buddha was just confused with an ordinary monk. So Mingun Tipitaka Dharasiyaro, who is no idiot, he knew this stuff, but being like Burmese, very Burmese, he could not question the commentarial tradition. He could not question. The suttas themselves don't say that the Buddha was 27 feet tall. That's like a commentarial thing. But you got to believe all of it. It's sort of like this medieval Catholic sort of attitude towards one's religion. You just don't question it. It is gospel truth, period. So Mingun Tipitaka Dharasiyaro came up with this theory that in the Buddhist time, people were more virtuous. And so the gods loved people more than they do now, including the weather gods, the gods who cause timely rains and so forth. And so because the weather was better, because the weather gods loved people more, because the people were more virtuous, the crops grew better and more nutritious, so that everybody was, above 20 feet tall. And of course, archaeological evidence does not bear this out. Just physics doesn't bear this out. It'd be physically impossible, just going with the laws of physics as we know them today, for a human being to be that tall and retain the same proportions as a human being now. I mean, he'd just be completely monstrous. Even King Kong, who was only like 40 feet tall. Yeah, well, King Kong, I guess, was like 40 feet tall. You can read articles about how King Kong couldn't possibly have supported his own weight, and a 27-foot tall human would be about the same. They'd be in the same kind of predicament. There's like this scaling issue of, like, as height doubles with the proportions remaining the same, it's like, let's see, surface area squares and volume cubes. So, like, if he was 4.5 times the size, I'm not going to be able to do the math in my head, not off the cuff like this while I'm talking. But, I mean, he just would not have enough lung capacity. I mean, it's like his lung capacity would just be a fraction of what an ordinary person's lung capacity would be, because he would have, like, proportionally less surface area to his lungs, supplying oxygen to greatly increased mass, this kind of thing. Like, his bones wouldn't hold him up because the cross section of his leg bones, for example, would be squared, whereas the weight that they would have to support would be cubed, this kind of thing. So, getting back to Mingun Tipitaka Dharasyato, who had memorized the entire 40 volumes of the Pali Tipitaka the Burmese Pali Tipitaka. That was his theory, but I really don't think it's, like, spread throughout the country or anything, because most people, they're just not really going to investigate this. They just accept it with humble faith and just do not try to delve into the details, because they might not like what they see. So, yeah, I used to bring that up when I was in Burma too. It's like, I mean, how could he have fathered a child with an ordinary woman if he was 27 feet tall? How would he get into his own house? This kind of thing. But now you know. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And Fred says, regarding chanting, when the king visited the monks in the forest, it was total silence. Does that not imply no chanting? So I guess Fred asked a question in the previous Q&A about whether monks were allowed to chant. And so this is kind of a follow-up question. I guess he's citing a sutta, possibly the Samanyapala Sutta, where the king visits the monks in the forest and it's just dead silent. And you can see mentions of just the silence of the Sangha contrasted to just like the babbling, constant conversation of like the followers of other religions, like Ajivakas, for example. But I mean, just because it's total silence when the king arrives doesn't mean that the monks were just constantly totally silent. When they're sitting with the Buddha, it could be like a meditation session. It could be they're just quietly waiting until the Buddha decides to start delivering a sermon, that kind of thing. So, I mean, just because chanting was allowed doesn't mean that, the Sangha would be chanting 24/7. So there would be times when the monks were just silent. But still, I mean, you can find in the text, it could be an anachronism where you've got monks that have to recite texts in order to memorize them because they're not written down. That was just the way it was done. So, when the king visits the monks in the forest and there's total silence, it implies that there was no chanting when he arrived, but it doesn't mean that there was total silence always, that there was no chanting ever. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Sam Papalapa, who for short we can just call Sam. And Sam says, the devas and or gods, small g gods, and all the beings Buddha talks about or to in the suttas, thought, beliefs, assumptions. Okay, so he wants my honest opinion about like the gods, the small g gods in the Buddhist pantheon, especially the ones that came to Earth and were interviewing, asking questions of the Buddha and so forth, just coming to pay their respects, maybe. And I mean, I could take this even further, like the portrayals of devas in Burmese art, traditional Burmese Buddhist art, for example. The gods, they look Burmese, their ethnicity looks Burmese. The males have no facial hair as a general rule, and they're wearing the clothing and like the crowns and so forth of Burmese royalty and like high-ranking courtiers back in the days of the Burmese kings. So the male devas are wearing like these pagoda-shaped crowns, and the female devas are wearing, it looks sort of like Flash Gordon helmets. And they've got like these fancy epaulets on their shoulders and long gowns and so forth. And so, I mean, you take this back to the suttas, and I would assume that there is a lot of just ancient Indian mythology, predating Buddhism. In the Ganges Valley, people believed in devas. I mean, the Rig Veda, the oldest literature still existing that could be called Indian. I mean, it's hymns to these devas. One of the main ones being Indra, who converted to Buddhism allegedly and became known as Sangha. So, I mean, it's really hard to say what some enlightened sage and saint, what kind of beings are going to be visiting this person. And it would not surprise me if there were like superhuman beings that did associate with the Buddha. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't kind of make sense, actually, from like a Buddhist point of view. Like, I mean, anyone who's read the biography or autobiography of Ajahn Mun, I mean, he was just inundated by devas visiting him, so that it was like standing room only. I mean, he had to teach Dhamma to the devas in shifts. They couldn't all fit at the same time, so it's like they had to take a number or something. And a lot of this is just the beliefs of Buddhist people that kind of create this kind of situation. And I mean, that's the way the whole world works, really. I mean, it's just like a manifestation of mind anyway. So it could be that you have a radically different culture, like a pre-scientific culture. There can be radically different beings inhabiting the world that people can perceive. So, I mean, I'm not going to completely rule out the possibility that like superhuman beings that in Buddhist cosmology or Buddhist philosophy you would call devas or even Brahmas would have interactions with the Buddha. Like I got a picture of Neem Karoli Baba up there on top of the bookcase. That, I mean, he was supposedly interacting with non-human beings too at some higher level. And I mean, maybe the Buddha did. I have no way of proving it one way or the other. But I think a lot of the descriptions of these devas really are sort of anthropomorphizing and just largely influenced by ancient mythology, ancient beliefs. So that's and like I was saying, like the Burmese have taken that even farther with regard to making devas look like medieval Burmese royalty. So, yeah, I mean, with regard to this universe, I'm sure there have to be superhuman beings in this universe, and there could be superhuman beings like right here that we just cannot perceive. We just are too primitive. Maybe our perceptual system is just too primitive to be aware of it. Just like an ant crawling across somebody's bare foot is completely unaware that they're crawling across. They're like intimate contact with some super ant being. And it could be that way for people. We could just be like interacting with devas, or what a Buddhist would call devas, without fully realizing it at the conscious level. And it just seems pretty much, very, very likely that there are superhuman beings in this universe. If we are the best this entire universe, this entire cosmos has to offer, then the cosmos is kind of destitute in certain ways. But I do think that it's anthropomorphized and sort of translated into something that the pre-modern Indian imagination could grasp and deal with intelligently, more or less. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, I'm having trouble squaring the fact that ultimately there is no self, no I that exists, with the need to assert and defend this non-existent self in conventional reality. Say, for example, someone rudely cuts you in line while at the store, or a significant other is flirting with other people, or a competitive coworker is causing drama for you at work. During such experiences, I can see how simply noting hurt or anger arising and the accompanying physical sensations and not attaching thoughts and feelings to a self will lead to less personal suffering, but sometimes this just seems too abstract and unrealistic. Maybe too unrealistic, although Romeo didn't say that part. But he continues, do you ever have difficulty reconciling the ultimate truth of lacking a self while living conventionally in society? Any tips for someone that's having this difficulty? Well, the ultimate truth of lacking a self while living in the conventional truth of samsara, they don't necessarily apply to each other. It's like two different levels of truth. Ultimate truth and conventional truth. Conventional truth isn't really true. It just appears true, and people agree on it. That people exist, for example, when ultimately, from the point of view of Buddhist philosophy, it's like a mental construct. Human beings do not have an ultimately real, separated individuality. That we are conventionally real, virtually real. So it's like virtual reality versus ultimate reality. And the virtual reality isn't really real. It's kind of suffused with reality. So, for example, let's see some of the examples here. Someone rudely cuts you in line while at the store, significant other is flirting with other people. All that is virtual. It's ultimately, it's not really happening. So it's like being in a dream. So it's like sort of, you're dreaming that some stuff is happening, but in reality, it's just a dream. And so, you could get more skillful, practice lucid dreaming so that you'd be aware that it was just a dream all the time. But most people are just stuck in samsara. Most people in this world probably, they just think samsara is reality, like the only reality that really matters to them. They just completely blue-pilled. They are just wallowing in the matrix. So it's not so much a matter of reconciling no self with perceived self. It's just a matter of not just getting completely lost in the matrix and thinking that the matrix is the reality. And that's one reason why monks renounce the world and they go off and live in a cave in a forest somewhere, so you don't have all these distractions and all this reinforcing context of samsara keeping you locked into it. So, you'd be like a holy fool. Just, you're still kind of in samsara, interacting with other people, including the, the competitive coworker that is causing drama for you at work. I mean, and then you're still just practicing intensive mindfulness. Just, you sort of deconstruct the competitive coworker into stimuli. You deconstruct the significant other who's flirting with someone else as just stimuli, perceptions. I mean, if you're doing advanced practice, that's what you do, but it's way easier to do that alone in a cave than like in the midst of decadent society, like Prince Mishkin in Dostoevsky's The Idiot. I mean, he got destroyed. Forrest Gump did better. Forrest Gump was a holy fool also. He did better than Prince Mishkin. So, I mean, the best you can do in a case like that, well, I mean, the best you can do is be fully enlightened, I suppose. But, like, don't take it too seriously, because it's like you're in a dream world, you're in the Matrix. And this whole phenomenal world is dependently co-arising. It's like context is the dependent co-arising of samsara. It's in a way, it's just everything is dependent upon context. It's like the context of everything is just sort of like stabilizing everything so that it seems to be real. And it's very difficult to explain. Well, I mean, this is one of the main reasons why people renounce the world and become monks, because it simplifies the stimuli, simplifies the context, makes it easier to disentangle yourself from it. Let's see. So the question here, do you ever have difficulty reconciling the ultimate truth of lacking a self while living conventionally in society? Any tips for someone that's having this difficulty? Yeah, I mean, it's not so much reconciling anatta or no self with the apparent selves in society. It's just like, the danger is just getting lost in samsara. Just becoming blue-pilled and like losing any higher awareness. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, in my case, I was just a monk for 30 years, trying to cultivate this kind of awareness that this is not the highest truth. Ultimately, I do not exist. It's just sort of generated through perceived context, this kind of thing. So, yeah, just try not to get lost in the matrix. Try and keep that red pill going a little bit. I mean, red pill, blue pill, that comes from the movie The Matrix, I'm pretty sure. Just at a higher level. Like some theist could just say at a higher level it's just God. Everything is God. And it's just dividing everything up into parts is like, it's removed from God to some degree, at least conceptually. So you want to avoid becoming totally removed. I mean, you can still function in samsara and still act as though you have a self, and at a certain level you are believing that you exist and all that. It's just you don't want to completely cut off even like this subliminal awareness. It's kind of an interest, subliminal, like sublime, subliminal awareness that this is not ultimate reality. And I don't know if I answered that question very well, but it's time to move on to the next one. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita, who for short we can call Sid. And Sid says, what do you think about Aristotle's statement on natural inequality and slavery? And he quotes Aristotle, apparently. He says, quote, some men are by nature free, while others are by nature slaves, and this determines their capacities to govern or be governed. The slave by nature is one whose mind does not reach deliberation about what is beneficial for the common good, but only about what serves himself and his master. Therefore, it is useful for him to be under the rule of another, whereas the one who possesses sufficient reason to deliberate about the general good is by nature destined to govern. Well, this is the first time I've read this particular quote that I can remember. I have read some quotes from Aristotle. I never read an entire book by Aristotle that I can recall. Read some essays, that kind of thing. But I do recall reading some statement of Aristotle about slave races, where Aristotle was saying that some races or ethnicities make better slaves than others. And I have this hazy memory of like lazy people make better slaves than hardworking people, just because they probably have less initiative to change their predicament, and just kind of passive people. And so, I mean, I don't want to offend the Burmese, but there were times when I was in Burma where it did seem like the Burmese would have been what Aristotle would call a slave race, partly because the Burmese, I mean, they are kind of passive. They're just willing to endure horrible situations that, a Westerner would find just intolerable. Nothing working right, for example. Their government, for example. And they were very class conscious people, the Burmese. Like, there's half a dozen different words, like pronouns for me, half a dozen different pronouns for you. And the pronouns that you use with regard to yourself and the person you're talking to depend upon your relative social status. So if you're of higher social status than the person you're talking to, you call them like min or nin, this kind of thing. But if they were like more advanced than you, like a monk, you'd call them a shimpia, like venerable lord. And like back in British times, the British administrators were called a shimpia also. They were getting the total ass kissing treatment. And it's just, Burmese are very class conscious, and they will grovel before people they consider to be their social superiors, and just act like, sometimes like despots to people that are of lower rank than they are. Some of them, not all of them. But it is kind of ingrained into the culture that there is a tendency in that direction. And so also they're kind of small. You don't want a slave that's just this towering hulk, way stronger than you, I guess. Although, it works for elephants, that sort of thing. But with regard to what Aristotle is saying here, natural inequality, well, there's obviously natural inequality. It's like the thing that all men are created equal. It doesn't mean that everyone is the same. It doesn't mean that everyone has the same strengths and talents and so forth. It just means that everyone should have the same chance, the same, they're held the same in the eyes of God, perhaps, and they should have the same rights. They should, have to follow the same laws and so forth. But I guess that was just sort of an aside. Some men are by nature free, while others are by nature slaves. And this determines their capacities to govern or be governed. I'm not 100% sure that Aristotle was correct in that, like, the people who, let's see, the slave by nature is one whose mind does not reach deliberation about what is beneficial for the common good, but only about what serves himself and his master. A lot of, like, kings and emperors have fit that description, where they don't really care that much about the common good. They mainly just care about what serves themselves and just the people that, that they can control to some degree that are beneficial to them. It's like Roman emperors, even bad Roman emperors, would try to be on good terms with the army, at least, because it was through the military that they had their power. And even nowadays, like politicians nowadays, it seems to be more of a thing that they pretend to care about the common good more than they're actually like striving to improve the prosperity of the people that they are supposedly governing. And it's just like this trope in politics now that you don't solve problems, you just promise to solve problems, while at the same time, like, continuing the problem just so that you'll continue to have something to promise to make better when you run for office next time. So I think, for me, what I remember reading about slave races might have more empirical validity than this where, I mean, you just have someone thinks, they've got some capacity for independent thought and they're energetic, intelligent, that sort of thing. Fine. They can be masters of something. And the people that are just like sheeple, sort of passive and lazy and not too bright, and it's like they shouldn't be enslaved, going with modern values. I mean, slavery is sort of an evil we have put behind us. But still, I mean, they're going to be enslaved to something. Some people are enslaved to drugs. Some people are enslaved to food. Some people are enslaved to sports gambling. So I guess there is some validity to this, even if slavery is obsolete now. And I have to admit that I really do not think slavery was a good thing. It was just a reality for centuries. And unlike what a lot of people on the left would like to believe, it is white people who ended slavery. We did not invent it. Pretty much every major culture for thousands of years had slavery, and it was white people, especially English people, who just forcibly put an end to it. So, let's see. What is the actual question? What do I think about Aristotle's statement? So, yeah, I pretty much said what I think about it. I mean, there's nothing really concise or incisive. Any word that has sice in it. Just because it's something I really don't think about all that much, especially lately. And, just slavery, I think it served its purpose, I guess. It's like slavery partly started due to like intertribal warfare. And instead of just killing off everybody that you defeat in war, you just say, all right, you got to work for me now. Yes, in a way, that's preferable to just slaughtering all the prisoners of war. Like Rome, I mean, they just had this massive amount of slaves back in their expansionist phase just because of all the prisoners of war. And I guess it's better to enslave them than just have them all put to death. And I mean, had a little more sense than some people do nowadays, where they weren't just going to say, okay, well, I mean, sometimes they did. You'd have a barbarian army would invade Roman territory. The Romans would defeat them. The enemy would surrender. And then the Romans would say, okay, you can just settle this farmland we got over here, and just sort of accept them into the country. But that was less common then than it is now, I think. Of course, nowadays they don't have to just come in to raid and pillage, because they just come in and just get free welfare handouts. So, yeah, I guess I answered that question. I mean, it was, what do I think about it? So I answered the question adequately, I suppose, because I really don't think very much about that sort of stuff. And so we're just going to move on to the next question, which is from Alba Cochina, who we can, for short, call Al. And Al says, would you be able to give a brief summarized timeline of your life with the calendar years? And then in parentheses, he's got pre-monkhood, years as a monk in Burma. Oh, I'm just now being told that I have a low battery because I forgot to plug in the computer. Just a second. One moment, please. Also, I probably forgot to close out all the extra tabs so that this could start lagging. Maybe I'll just do that real quick. Just a second. Yeah, I don't have lots of extra tabs anyway. So I guess we're good. Oh, there's one. Yeah, okay. If I have the music tab open, things are more likely to lag because apparently it uses a lot of computer juice, so to speak. So anyways, Al was saying, would you be able to give a brief summarized timeline of your life with the calendar years? And then in parentheses, it says pre-monkhood, years as a monk in Burma, years as a monk in the US, and post-monkhood. So, okay. Yeah. Dodged a bullet on that one. We're down to 8% of the battery. So, okay, I guess it would all start. Let's just leave previous lives out of this, because then it would just be a very long digression, or regression, I should say. So, I guess we start with 1962, in which reportedly I was conceived in a parked car in a place called Hooligan Flats. Then I was born in Seward, Alaska, near Hooligan Flats, in 1963. Then, in 1964, April of 1964, there was the Great Alaska Earthquake, one of the biggest earthquakes in the Northern Hemisphere in the 20th century, I'm pretty sure. And so our house and also my father's place of business were pretty much destroyed. And so in 1964, my father migrated out of Alaska into Grays Harbor County in Washington State, Aberdeen, Washington, home of Kurt Cobain. So that's where I grew up. I grew up in Aberdeen, spent 1 year in Hoquiam, which is right next door to Aberdeen. And let's see, if I open and close my mouth, yeah, it keeps up. It's not even lagging very much. Maybe just a little bit. So, let's see, I lived in Aberdeen and Hoquiam, part of the Tri-Cities of Aberhocomopolis in Grays Harbor County. Good place to grow up, by the way. Until I went to college. I went to college in Bellingham, Washington. And then I lived in Bellingham after graduation until I became a monk. So, let's see, I became a monk in 1991. So, like from 1981, no, from like the early to mid 80s to 1991, I lived in Bellingham. And then I became a monk, and I became a monk in California, Boulder Creek, California, Tongpulu Kaba-e Monastery, which is like, Tongpulu means like little hill, Kaba-e means world peace. So I was there for almost 2 years, and then I went to Burma, and I lived in Burma for up until 2018, more on than off. I would come to America every once in a while. I made a few attempts. Oh, we are lagging. Yeah, we are lagging. You people that just are listening to the podcast have the advantage of not dealing with my lips not being in sync to the sounds perfectly. So I went to Burma, lived in Burma, like with a visit to America every like 5 years or so while my parents were alive, especially my father. And went to a few other countries. Oh, now we're lagging big time. That's too bad. Damn. Spent a few months in Indonesia, in Bali. Spent one rains retreat, the rains retreat of 1997 in Japan. Then I came back in like, I think it was December of 2018 was my final re-entry into the United States from Burma, from Asia. And just stayed at like this Burmese temple in French Camp, California, which is like 20 miles south of Stockton, until I just couldn't stand it anymore. It just, I mean, that was really, I just could not live in like the Burmese temple kind of environment. That's one of the reasons why I dropped out of the monkhood. It just wasn't working. And I was burned out on living in tropical Asia and just various reasons we don't need to get into. So then I dropped out of the monkhood in 2021, like May of 2021, when I'd been a monk for essentially exactly 30 years. And came to South Carolina, and I've been in South Carolina ever since. So, yeah, I worked in 2 sheet metal shops, and now I'm driving a forklift, loading and unloading trailers for a trucking company. So, I mean, I could get into the years as a monk in Burma. Okay, let's do that. Might as well. What the hell? So I started after a little bit of traveling at Tongpulu Chaltsin Doya about, gosh, I can't remember if it's 50 or 100 miles south of Mandalay. It's just a desert, just blazing hot wasteland. Then after a little over a year there, I went to Mahagandayon's big school monastery near Mandalay. Stayed there for a little over a year. Came back to Chaltsin Doya again because that's where my acharya, my teacher, Tongpulu Siato, or not Tongpulu Siato, Pakogu Siato, Tongpulu Chaltsin Doya Siato. That was his monastery. Went and spent a few months at the Beit Ain Doya in Mon State in the south. After that, I started escaping from the blazing hot wastelands of central Burma by going to Alando Kathpa National Park. It's like the northern edge, the northern boundary of Alando Kathpa National Park. Alando Kathpa National Park is shaped sort of like the Vulcan Live Long and Prosper sign, where you got, the main part, let's put my hand here in the center. The main part of the park would be like the palm of my hand. And then there's like two, ranges of hills going up like this. And right in the center is Patolone Creek and a number of villages. And so just looking on the map, an old topographic map made by the British, I could see right here was the place to live, where you've got national park on three sides and you've got an alms resort. You got villagers that can put food in my bowl. So that's where I stayed there a combined total of about 2 years, but it was stretched out over 5 years. It was mostly the hot season. I'd go there during towards the end of the cold season, stay through the hot season until the monsoon started, and then I'd leave. I did spend one monsoon there, which was one of the most miserable years of my life. It was just awful, but we don't need to get into that. Then I spent some time at Migadawan Monastery in the foothills of the Shan Plateau, which is also kind of cool. It's cold in the wintertime, especially when you don't have like hot water heaters and that kind of thing. But it was survivable there. And then I came back to America. And I'm just going to move on to this question now. This is from the Saboteurs. And the Saboteurs say, regarding your advice to avoid karma by doing nothing, not to kill one person to save 10, what is your view of the famous saying, quote, all it takes for evil to succeed is for good to do nothing, unquote. Well, it wasn't really my advice to avoid karma by doing nothing. I'm just pointing out that Buddhist ethics are like negative ethics. It's don't do this and don't do that. It's like doing nothing is like karmically and ethically neutral. You're not doing anything wrong by doing nothing. That's just ancient Indian Buddhist ethics. It's not really my advice. So yeah, to avoid, not to kill one person to save 10, that's just Buddhist ethics. It's not really my advice. People, I've said before, you got to make your own choices. If you consider it to be really what you ought to do, to take out some sniper before he takes out other people, that's your choice. But you're going to be taking a karmic hit by doing it. So let's see. All it takes for evil to succeed is for the good to do nothing. Well, you're not even really the good. It's like a dichotomy. If you're not doing anything, that's not good. It's not evil either. It's the monks are supposed to just separate themselves from this dichotomy of good and evil. You read some of the suttas, it says, a monk shouldn't do good or evil. He's just supposed to rise above the whole distinction of good and evil, this whole samsaric duality. But, it's your choice. You don't have to be a saint, obviously, Buddhist or otherwise. So, you got your own decisions to make. If you think it's what you ought to do is to take out the sniper before he takes out other people, for example, or I wrote a blog post about this once. It's let's say you have some Buddhist government catches a terrorist. The terrorist has already planted a bomb in the capital city, downtown somewhere. He's the only person who knows where the bomb is, and the bomb is set on a timer. So you have this terrorist, he's already set a bomb that's going to kill hundreds or thousands of people. So is it justified to extract the location of that bomb from that terrorist through vigorous questioning, let us say, putting him to the question, as they used to euphemistically say back in the Middle Ages? And I mean, that's the kind of situation that monks avoid by just renouncing the world and going out into a forest. There's a Jataka story about the Buddha in a previous life. It's the Temiya Jataka, where he's like a crown prince. But when he's very small, like a toddler, he's sitting on his father's lap while his father is sitting in judgment. And criminals come in and, he just, off with their head kind of stuff. And this toddler, who was a bodhisattva, he realizes, if I grow up and become king like daddy, I'm going to have to be sentencing people to death and so forth. And so from that point on, he just pretended to be a deaf mute, just to avoid the whole situation. And that is what ancient Indian Buddhist ethics is like. So for evil to succeed, then yeah, it's not necessarily the good who do nothing. It's like the people who are just opting out of the whole duality who do nothing. But you take it to its logical consequence, and it's like some action movies where, the only difference between the good guys and the bad guys are the good guys are a little more selective with regard to who they're shooting. So let's see here. What is my view of the famous saying, all it takes for evil to succeed is for the good to do nothing? Yeah, within a societal context, yeah, sure. And in which case the good are going to sacrifice some of their goodness in order to fight back against evil. And you want to be the tragic hero who sacrifices your own spiritual welfare for the sake of others. That's your choice to make. That's your call. And I'm not going to judge you for it. So I hope I answered that one, because I'm moving on to the next question, which is from Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Libra Lamb, and etc. And Stellar Supreme, etc., says, do you consider it theoretically possible that Jesus was the incarnation of the Brahma, who as a mortal decided to create an incarnation because after visiting the Buddha, he realized he couldn't become enlightened unless he was a human? So do I consider it theoretically possible? Just about anything is theoretically possible. Like in an infinite universe, then, everything that's possible is going to happen somehow or another. I don't think it's exactly plausible that Jesus was like the incarnation of some Brahma that went and spoke to the Buddha. I would consider that rather unlikely. Still it's possible, like from the point of view of like quantum physics, it would not be statistically one of the most likely routes for worldly reality to move, in my opinion. So it's theoretically possible, but I wouldn't bet on it. It's just like this wild hypothesis that, where you're trying to sort of transplant Indian, like, theology into, like, Jewish or proto-Jewish philosophy in the early Roman Empire. So you'd have to take the whole story of the Brahma visiting the Buddha literally as just literal history. And even good luck trying to prove that. But damn near anything is possible in theory. Anything that you can imagine, plus a lot of things you can't imagine, are possible in theory. So I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme, etc's next question, which is a follow-up. He says, would my theory have more credence given Digha Nikaya number 4 saying only a Buddha can produce wisdom and morality in the world, given that nobody seems to have ready access to CDs or powers these days, if we take it as given that Jesus really did perform CD type miracles. Well, I mean, CDs apparently aren't all that rare in India, even though Buddhism is relatively rare in India now. Neem Karoli Baba, up there. I always use the wrong finger. Up there. I mean, he was just, miracles just flowed out of him. Apparently, allegedly. Even if only a tiny fraction of the ones mentioned in Ram Dass's book were true, still, it's pretty amazing. So, I mean, the whole idea that only a Buddha can produce wisdom and morality in the world, I don't think so. I do not think that Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism have a monopoly on enlightenment or wisdom or morality or goodness. There's like this idea in Theravada Buddhism that you got these cycles of time where you've got like the Buddha reestablishes Dhamma, and then everything just goes downhill and downhill and downhill and downhill until it's like people eating each other, having a lifespan of 10 years. It's just like no virtue, no morality at all. And I just don't think so. In a way, it's just a sincere overestimation of one's own religion, which is just common human nature. So I don't think that Buddhism has any kind of monopoly on wisdom or goodness. I mean, anybody with, you can have like an Eskimo living in the Arctic. They can just sit there and just watch the sun over the ice, and you can get insights. Just spontaneously, this intuition. And I think the reason why I mentioned Eskimo is like, I remember a long time ago reading a new agey kind of book, like one of those Shambhala kind of books of different sages from different cultures. And there was like like a female Eskimo, like a shaman or something, who just had this flash of insight when she went outside of the bark house or whatever she was living in, probably not an igloo, to pee. And it's like that kind of stuff can happen. It may be that a Buddha he develops, like a systematic method called Dhamma or Dharma that helps people to become enlightened. But still, obviously he was trying to become enlightened before he became a Buddha. He had spiritual teachers before he became a Buddha. So there was still some kind of wisdom and like virtue and so forth there in the Ganges Valley and elsewhere before the Buddha became enlightened and started the wheel of Dharma moving. And I don't think that Buddhism has any monopoly on CDs. I think that Buddhism kind of discourages like miracles and psychic powers and so forth, unlike some schools of Hinduism that really play them up, or Christianity for that matter. So, would Lieberlam, Stellar Supreme, etc.'s theory have more credence given Digha Nikaya 4 saying only a Buddha can produce wisdom and morality in the world? I just don't think that that's true. If it were true, then yeah, that might lend some more credence to the original hypothesis that Jesus was a reincarnation of some Brahma that had met the Buddha and learned that only humans can become enlightened. But it seems like there's an awful lot of like mythology and legend and so forth muddying the waters in this case. So I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme, etc., etc.'s next question. And I think this is also a follow-up. Oh, maybe not. He says, does this approach defy the spirit of the middle way? And then he's got this quote: do 5 precepts zealously. If you can force yourself to do 8 without becoming unstable, do that on Uposatha days. If you can manage 8 every day, do that all your life. If you're really inclined in seeking out trivial intermediary attainments outside of wisdom ethics, then don't risk a monastic life for them. karmic consequences, cleaning the hand of ethics with a filthy hand of wisdom, and try to dry that well. Her wet going to dry is wisdom, before preparing for an elite death in old age, sort of like how Brahmins did in the time of the Buddha, but tempered by Buddha Dhamma instead of petty practices. By elite death, I mean having gotten 5 years of monastic life under your belt and going rhino with full dutangas, by letting that expedite one's death through health complications like not sleeping by sitting in full lotus all night. You reduce the risk of bailing out toward the end by compressing the end of your life. I figure it banks on being able to prepare for such adversity and timing it right, but also that this would only be viable for an old person, because if a young person attempted this, there would be interventions made by others. And gosh, I think he has like one beginning parenthesis without the closing parenthesis somewhere in here, which results in a kind of like a logical short circuit or something, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if there's an unquote. Yeah. Gosh. Yeah, he didn't unquote it or close the parentheses. Maybe he just started rambling and just decided, well, I better just stop now. Gosh, does this approach defy the spirit of the middle way? And I do not fully grasp it, this kind of rambling description of like some kind of approach to the holy life. Do 5 precepts zealously. Well, it depends on what zealously is. I mean, that in itself could defy the spirit of the middle way if your zealotry is extreme. See, if you can force yourself to do 8 without becoming unstable, do that on Uposatha days. Well, I mean, I don't see how anyone would become particularly unstable just from keeping 8 precepts for one day every 8 days, 4 days a month. Let's see. If you can manage 8 precepts every day, do that all your life. I mean, that's the middle path. I mean, a lot of people do not really understand what the middle path is, considering that, I mean, the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture involved wandering homeless and penniless and sleeping under trees and silently begging for your food in the streets, and that kind of thing. So that the middle path as taught by the Buddha would just be like absolute extremism to most Buddhists nowadays. So the spirit of the middle way is, I think that spirit has been taking various routes. What is considered to be the middle way and what really is the middle way and that sort of thing. I mean, we'd have to tease all that stuff out. Let's see. So let's continue this a little bit. If you're really inclined in seeking out trivial intermediary attainments, maybe he means like psychic powers, outside of wisdom and ethics, then don't risk a monastic life for them. Yeah, I mean, you can become a monk for bad reasons. You can start meditating for bad reasons. You can start practicing Dhamma for bad reasons. But if you're practicing correctly, you will cultivate wisdom, and then maybe your reasons will get better. It's like the Buddha's half-brother Nanda already mentioned in this Q&A. It was his wedding day, and the Buddha kind of played a dirty trick on him and showed him visions of what celestial nymphs look like. And so Nanda he just jilted his would-be bride at the altar practically in order to be ordained as a monk so he can get those celestial nymphs. But then he was practicing correctly. I mean, he had Gautama Buddha as his meditation instructor, I suppose. And so he became enlightened, and of course, then he didn't want the nymphs anymore. Let's see. Where were we here? Let's see. Don't try to risk a monastic life for them. And then he's got like this I guess he does have a closing parenthesis. Gosh, this is kind of confusing though. I don't think he has a closing unquote though. See, cleaning karmic consequences, cleaning the hand of ethics with a filthy hand of wisdom. Try to dry that well away. Yeah, that part is kind of vague. It's not really straightforward to understand. Before preparing for an elite death in old age. See, by elite death, he means having gotten 5 years of monastic life under your belt and going rhino with full dutangas. I mean, dutangas are optional, not really 100% necessary for everybody. Gosh. So it just kind of rambles here towards the end, and it kind of is not easy to fully understand exactly what the hell he's getting to. By getting that expedite one's death, by letting that expedite, I think, one's death through health complications, like not sleeping by sitting in full lotus all night, you reduce the risk of bailing out towards the end by compressing the end of your life. So apparently he's saying that if you're practicing full blast, that it may kind of wear out your body to some degree and cause you to die when you're younger and more vigorous. Something like that. I mean, there could be some truth to that, but really, your karma is going to give you what you need. I mean, you shouldn't be deliberately trying to shorten your life through like extreme or this really rigorous ascetic practice. So that would not be like a good example of the middle path. If you're like deliberately trying to like burn out, blaze of glory instead of like fading out. But I really do not fully comprehend where the question went to, like the second half of it. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, would you agree that time is the perception or experience of impermanence? Yeah, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Time would be the perception or experience of impermanence, or the perception of like the distance between two events. Time. Yeah, I mean, I read a book. It was a classic book. It was like, what was the name of it? It was a science book, classic science book. It was Time's Arrow and Evolution, something like that, where the author was saying that time is, it's like entropy is the measure of time. Just things going from organized to more random. Entropy in the physical sense is what is sort of fueling the passage of time for us. Although I do think Kant was correct that space and time are just categories, like mental constructs. They are perceptual. So, yeah, I mean, what Rui said, I can accept that. I mean, it wouldn't be the only valid way of describing time, but time is perceptual. And you could say is the perception of impermanence. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Sure. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cyrus Frame. And Cyrus Frame says, let's see, we are recording, aren't we? Yeah. Cyrus Frame says, I had never heard of the Atthakavagga before watching your videos. Do you remember how you came across it? And yeah, I do remember how I came across it. I would specify before getting into the little autobiographical sketch that in the Pali Tipitaka there are two noteworthy Atthakavaggas. That in the Anguttara Nikaya, the group of eights, is also called the Atthakavagga, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata, which is the group of octads, because there's a core of very old suttas in the Atthakavagga that are 8 verses long. Some later Buddhist schools mistranslated Atthakavagga as like, what is it? Like Astikavagga or something, Astikavarga or something, where Atta has been reinterpreted to mean something like benefit, or like the essence, the meaning, that kind of thing. But pretty obviously it means the group of octads. And the very first time I encountered it, I was a college student in Bellingham, Washington, and in the library they had Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East series, and I was kind of sampling that. I was checking out books from Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East series and reading them. And one of the volumes that I read was a very early translation of the Sutta Nipata by, let's see, Herman Jacobi, I think. I guess it would be pronounced Jacobi, something like that. I think he was European. And it was like an old pioneering translation of the Sutta Nipata from like the 1890s. But the Atthakavagga, that chapter of the Sutta Nipata, really struck me as profound, more so than the other chapters. And so even as a college student, just being exposed to that, it was sort of one of my best tastes of profundity in Theravada Buddhism, was just in that old translation of the Atthakavagga, which is part of the Sutta Nipata. So yeah, I was in college, and just almost at random, I just checked out that volume of Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East series, and just came across the Atthakavagga, which I admired and respected ever since. So much so that I made my own translation, just because I couldn't really find a satisfactory one at the time. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, sometimes my mind will say bad things about the Buddha. Is it a demon? And what can be done to remedy this? Well, when I read this question, it reminded me of, I used to know one of the world's leading authorities on obsessive compulsive disorder. And one of the possible symptoms, compulsive OCD can have various kinds of symptoms. One person might just be washing their hands 100 times a day until the skin on their hands is just chapped and cracked and bleeding. Other people will have they'll have to check the door to make sure it's locked over and over and over again, this kind of thing. And another possible kind of symptom of OCD that some people have is these obtrusive thoughts. And I remember there was a case history in the book that my friend wrote, he was my friend at the time. We haven't communicated in many years, but he sent me a copy of his book about obsessive compulsive disorder. And there was one case history of this devout Catholic person who kept having these intrusive thoughts of the Virgin Mary is a bitch, this kind of stuff. The Virgin Mary is a whore. And that was a symptom of OCD, at least from a scientific point of view. And I think it's that same book that mentions John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress, one of the most well-known Christian books aside from the Bible in English literature. And he apparently also had this kind of obtrusive thoughts that I think he considered it to be devils or something that were trying to lead him astray. So, I mean, maybe you could say it's a demon, although also I think personally what works better for me, unless you got some good evidence that it's some kind of, entity that's messing with you, is it's just sort of this perverse part of your personality that is resisting enlightenment because it doesn't want to die. It's like anyone who does intensive meditation, or a lot of people who do intensive meditation, know that your mind can just rebel against meditation, because your mind is like an animal. It's going to fight for its life. And when you become enlightened, it's sort of like a kind of death. So certain parts of your mind are going to rebel against Dharma because they want to stay in their unenlightened state, sort of healthy for them, even though ultimately it's delusional and unenlightened. So it could be something like that. That would be my guess. I don't know the details, of course, but it's just sort of this unenlightened aspect of your personality that just wants to stay the way it is, does not want to fade out if you become enlightened, that kind of thing. And so it's sort of making this passive aggressive, rebellious jab every now and then. And what can you do to remedy it? It may be that just the standard Buddhist panacea is just mindfulness. Just note it, let it go. Note it, let it go. Don't react, because reacting reinforces it. If the thought arises, just note the thought arising. Don't identify with it. It's not me. And just let it go. And if it's not really deeply ingrained, it could just fade out. Like obsessive compulsive disorder, you may not be completely cured of the compulsive urges and so forth, but at the very least, you know how to just disengage, not identify with it, and just continue with your life without being just derailed by it. So the urge to wash your hands comes up for someone with OCD. It's like they just have like these ways of dealing with it, which can include essentially Buddhist satipatthana practice. You just observe it. It's a mental state that's arising. It's like a dysfunctional mental state that's arising. It's not me. It's not me. It's the OCD. That was like one of the slogans in the book. And then you just like distract yourself away from it if necessary by just doing something else until it goes away. But don't give into it, anything like that. And I hope that was of some help, because I'm moving on to the next question, which is the last question. And this is from Kundru. And Kundru says, why do some Theravada monks shave their eyebrows while others don't? I've seen this specifically between Thai monks who shave their eyebrows and Burmese monks who don't. Okay, well, there is a rule of monastic discipline that a monk should shave his hair and beard, his head hair and his beard. And apparently in Thailand, they interpret head hair to include eyebrows. Although I've noticed that they don't go so far as to trim their eyelashes, which also is hair coming out of your head. But I have read in a book that the original reason why Thai monks started shaving their eyebrows is because Burma and Thailand, which was called Siam back then, I guess, were arch enemies, like Athens and Sparta, or like England and France. They were just traditional enemies. And sometimes one country would send spies into the other country disguised as monks, because monks are, holy men. You don't mess with them. You let them go their way. So let's see if I get the details of this right, how it worked. I think what happened was the Thais knew that there were Burmese spies coming into Thailand, or Siam, disguised as monks. So the Thais just passed, it was like the king or somebody passes this law that the monks have to shave their eyebrows. So of course, the Burmese monks not the Burmese monks, but the Burmese spies, impersonating monks, start shaving their eyebrows so that they'll fit in. But then the Thai spies in Burma could catch them when they come back. So when you see a Burmese guy with short hair and no eyebrows, he's a spy. So then they would deal with him in a way that would be politically appropriate for arch enemies and so forth. So that is one story I've read for why the Thais shaved their eyebrows. It's like it started off as a way of catching spies impersonating monks, and then there was like this law that Thai monks shaved their eyebrows, and then the origins of the law were lost to time. It just became a tradition, and it was just done without question, and it's justified by the idea that you're supposed to shave your head, and this is hair growing on your head. So that's how they would rationalize it now, if they have lost the old knowledge of, it used to be a way of catching Burmese spies. Or so I have read. I mean, that could just itself be some sort of made up legend. And it could have just been some arbitrary decision. Well, eyebrows are head hair, so you got to shave it off. But again, they don't bother with the eyelashes, which seems somewhat, I don't know. What's the word? Oh, there's a word to describe that. But I'm at the end of the Q&A, so I'm not going to bother trying to remember like incongruous or some word like that. So, as I should always say at the beginning, and practically never do, if you have any questions you think I can answer about early Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, Buddhism in general, Dharma, and even more general, philosophy, myself personally, this like Burma, monasticism, that kind of thing, feel free to ask. I can't promise I'll be able to answer, not very well anyway, but I'll do my best. And look at the URL links below, which includes links to my books on Amazon, which are about Buddhism, which should not surprise you. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. And be happy.